Good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very special day. Today, the 23rd of May 23. Well, in Brisbane, it is 12 degrees and sunny and a beautiful, glorious day looking out the window. Unfortunately, we are stuck inside. But anyway, it is a wonderful day and it's a great feeling. No better place to be than in Brisbane. Well, of course, today is that big reception for Modi. So it's Modi fever in Australia. There have been Modi expresses leaving from Brisbane for Sydney and coming from Melbourne. And there's just so much happening on there. There's so much hype out in the community. There's so much eagerness within the community to meet and cheer Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
उसने पन्ने चढ़ा रहा है, तो उस लिहाज से कह सकते हैं कि भारतवंशियों को भी गर्व होता है अपने पीएम पर, और पीएम मोदी भी किसी को निराश नहीं कर रहे हैं, चाहे उनके साथ तस्वीरें लेने का मौका हो, बातचीत करने का मौका हो, ऑटोग्राफ देने का मौका हो। इस भीड़ में आप बच्चों को भी देख सकती हैं, महिलाएं, ये तंगरी होटल इस वक्त गुंजायमान।
जी सुधाकर, प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी पूरी दुनिया में एक बेहद लोकप्रिय।
And there you go, that report there on his popularity. And so he is in Sydney, and last night there was a gathering of people who were fortunate enough to see him. Tonight is the big reception. 20,000 plus people are expected to be in that crowd. But right now, before we begin today's segment, let's take a look at the news in brief.
Nearly 20,000 people are expected to pack the Sydney Olympic Park today to welcome the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Mr Modi landed in Sydney last night in his first visit since 2014. Ahead of official talks with Anthony Albanese on Wednesday, the Indian leader will attend a major event being held in his honour tonight. The visit is controversial for some in the Indian community, with some groups accusing Mr Modi and his ruling party of treating minorities in India with contempt. They're calling on Australia to raise these concerns publicly. Police in Portugal are preparing to search a reservoir as part of an expanded effort to find missing British girl Madeleine McCann. The search will take place at the Arude Dam, about 50 kilometres inland from the beach resort where Madeleine went missing in 2007. Investigations are continuing this morning into a fatal shooting in Sydney's southwest yesterday, which is believed to be gang-related. Police found the victim, aged in his 20s, sitting in a car with gunshot wounds. He died at the scene. The ABC understands it was a targeted attack. A burnt-out car found in a nearby suburb is believed to be connected to the shooting. And the family of Claire Nowland, the 95-year-old woman who was tasered by New South Wales Police last week, has released a statement asking for privacy at what they called a very difficult time. The Nowlands have thanked everyone in Cooma, across the country, and those overseas for their support.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. That was the news in brief. Now, let's take some look at some of the news in details. First of all, more than 70 MPs will debate the Indigenous Voice to Parliament legislation. Here's that report.
The debate on the bill has begun in Parliament. So what can we expect this week, next week? What's happening?
Well, this week we're going to hear from more than 70 MPs from across the divide who are addressing Parliament and putting forward their position, putting it on the record. That's continuing on from what we heard yesterday. This is basically the formal debate on the bill that's needed to allow the referendum to go ahead, where Australians later this year will vote on whether to enshrine an independent advisory body for First Nations people into the Constitution. Things definitely got a little bit heated yesterday. We did hear from the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney. She's accused opposition leader Peter Dutton of spreading disinformation. He yesterday labelled the Voice as an overcorrection that will permanently divide the country by race. In there he made some references to George Orwell's novel Animal Farm. We know the Liberal Party is opposed to this model already, but they they will be supporting the bill to set up the referendum. It was interesting to hear what came out of that. We heard from Liberal MP Bridget Archer, who's actually hit back at her leader over the suggestions that he's made. She says, look, this won't actually have veto power. It won't be a third chamber. She says claiming otherwise is a deliberate and harmful representation of the facts. And she says his argument about this being divisive doesn't make sense. We're going to definitely hear from some people this week that they're trying to get some amendments through. We know Julian Leeser, who stepped back from the Liberal front bench over his support for the Yes campaign, does want the government's bill amended. He's been meeting with crossbenchers to try and gain their support. He's pretty worried that if support keeps declining, there isn't enough compromise. So he's basically looking at things like advising executive government and parliament, which was a point of contention for the Liberal Party. It's why they opposed this in the first place. Those amendments, though, they're pretty likely to fail. We've already heard from the Greens, who have been quite forthright in rejecting them. They say, look, we can't keep watering this down, otherwise we'll end up with nothing. We do know the government's also hinted that they aren't really planning on amending the proposal very much. They've argued that it's already gone through a longer consultation than other constitutional change. In the meantime, we've definitely got plenty of more speakers to go. The lower house is not expected to vote on the voice bill until next week. It's not expected to reach the Senate until about 3 weeks' time, when they're sitting again. Basically, what the government hopes is that they'll get this bill through by June, and then it'll set them up for the referendum at a time later this year. They're expecting between October and December, but they haven't announced that date yet.
And that date hasn't been announced, and later in the week we might have Brett Chilcott here in the studios. He is campaigning for the Yes to the Voice, and we'll get to hear his point of view and why he says yes. There are both sides of the coin, and while both parties, I think, agree to the referendum, but maybe some of the wordings and the legislation, one thing to be mindful is that not to create a permanent divide or a permanent distinction. I would be more happy with the more assimilation, because we have come a long way. Past is past. What's been done is not saying that that was right. What I'm saying is now, in moving forward, there should be just equality, everyone treated equally, my point of view. Well, right now, looking at Australia, where people are working very hard, especially in the small business sector, owner-operated businesses and things like that, finding it very hard to maintain that work and play-life balance, because bills need to be paid, there are things that need to be done. And we are worse off than US in this regards.
Australia has a worse work-life balance than the US, according to an OECD survey, and on average, workers put in 4 hours and 20 minutes of unpaid overtime per week. That leads to 6 weeks of unpaid overtime a year. Eliza Littleton is senior economist at the Australia Institute Centre for Future Work, and she joins us now from Canberra. Good afternoon, Eliza. So Australia has a reputation, don't we, for being relaxed at work and at play. That's not the case, it seems.
No, I mean, I think we like to tell ourselves that we're very relaxed and that we're laid back and we don't work too hard, but that's definitely not the case. Our research shows that unpaid overtime is a persistent and widespread issue in our workforce. We found that workers on average are doing 4 hours and 20 minutes of unpaid overtime every week, which results over the whole year in 6 weeks of unpaid overtime, and because of this, workers are losing $8,000 a year in unpaid wages as well. And this is not an exceptional thing. It happens across all industries, occupations and types of workers. So costing workers billions, and yeah, workers are giving away their work for free.
So overtime means not just staying longer at the office or workplace, it involves doing any sort of work outside the hours that have been agreed with your employer?
Yeah, so unpaid overtime was not just, in this case, measured as something people were doing at work. Of course, coming in early, staying late in the office contributes to this unpaid overtime issue. But technology has a really big role to play in contributing to unpaid overtime in Australia. People taking calls on holidays, on the weekends, at home. I think this is something we can all relate to, checking emails, responding to them as well. So we're just really contactable at all hours of the day because of the use of technology in our working lives.
And how has COVID and working from home affected things, Eliza?
Certainly over COVID and the pandemic, we saw an increase in unpaid overtime. We've been running this survey, which is called Go Home on Time Day, since 2009. And we found that there was a spike in unpaid overtime during COVID. I think, obviously there were a lot of people who weren't working, but those who could work and weren't essential workers were working at home. And I think we saw a really big kind of blurring of work and life. Outside of life because of the way that we were integrating work into our lives then, and it meant that people were reporting and doing a lot more unpaid overtime during that period.
So what's the reason then for these hours now of unpaid overtime? Is it because of hangover from COVID, worker shortages, or are workloads just simply too heavy?
It's all of those reasons. Our research found that some of the main reasons that people are doing so much unpaid overtime are not because individual workers are choosing to do this unpaid overtime. It's actually because of a lot of external kind of workplace forces that are contributing to it. So the things that you've mentioned are actually some of the top reasons, like workload issues, staffer shortages due to illnesses, and also the expectations of managers and workplace culture. So it tells us that it's a systemic problem, and it tells us that the solutions need to be rooted in our industrial relations laws.
That sounds as if it's going to take a long time to change, Eliza.
Potentially, but there's been a lot of movement and headway on these issues. We've seen, particularly from our own Parliament and the Senate Select Committee into Work and Care, recommending a right to disconnect, a 4-day work and a 4-day work week. These are things that our research has also shown could help improve work-life balance. And we've also shown that there's a lot of support amongst Australian workers, particularly for a right to disconnect. We found that 84% of workers would like to see a right to disconnect implemented by our government in our national employment standards.
From an individual point of view then, what can workers do if they are feeling the pressure of too much work? Can unions help, or what's the reception they're likely to get if they approach their boss themselves?
I think this is definitely something that workers should be banding together and doing with their collective power, particularly through a union or an enterprise bargaining agreement. We all know that there's a power dynamic in our workplaces that make it really hard for individual workers to ask for better conditions, to ask for better pay. But when workers work together and through a union, we know that, and history has showed us that unions have played a really big and important role in improving working conditions for workers. So, for example, the right to disconnect, that was won by a couple of different unions, the Victorian Police, EBA in 2019 won a right to disconnect, the Queensland Teachers Union last year won a right to disconnect. So history shows us that unions are a really good avenue for fighting for workers' rights and a way we can succeed and win these things.
So there you are, and there is always the two sides of the coin and the equation. While I do agree that the work-life balance should be there, when we're looking at productivity or people working a little bit late in hours, what about when people check their phones during working hours, access their private emails, book their flights and other things during working hours, and that goes unknown. And there's a lot of lack of productivity as well. Things that lag behind, costly mistakes that are made as well. So we need to look at both the sides of the equation as well. It's putting undue pressure on the employers as well, and also the name of the businesses because of like people, come in 9 to 5, I'll come in my time, done, or gone, that's it. So, that mentality as well. While the workers' rights are very well protected in this land with the industrial relation laws that are, the unions that are, the equation needs to be balanced. Both sides of the coin really needs to be looked at as well, not only one side and biased opinion. Right now, this new scheme that has come in by buy now, pay later. What do you reckon? Is it good? Is it bad? Or there needs to be more regulation in that field as well?
I think it's a very welcome development, Joe. The government was considering a few possible approaches to regulating the sector. There were 3 possible approaches that they could have taken, and it's ended up a little bit like the story of Goldilocks. One was considered too harsh, one was considered too soft, and they went with the option in the middle, which they consider to be just right.
Do you think it was the right option?
Yes, I do. I think well, let me say first of all that some regulation was definitely needed. So, there is emerging evidence that buy now, pay later doesn't always work well. I mean, and in a sense, you could say that's true of any debt product. Okay, so debt used appropriately is a really helpful and an important financial tool, but people can get into an awful lot of bother with debt, and some of the best research I've seen is on this topic is coming out of the US, and there is emerging evidence that users of buy now, pay later do on average have worse financial outcomes, and by that I mean that they end up paying much higher fees, much higher interest costs and so forth. So typically what happens if you miss one of your buy now pay later payments, then you'll be, if there's not sufficient funds in your account to cover that payment, then of course you're going to be hit with bank fees.
There is no thing such as, free service. There are catches and things like that. And if it sounds to be too good to be true, it usually is. So, as I mentioned in our rolling screen there, that this is the news segment, but we also have our commentary, and I for one am not in support or not in favor of use the things now and pay later. Just get the things, learn to live within your means. If you can't afford it, maybe you go without it. There are things for which the debt is okay. Of course, one area which we looked at in few days back was the HECS, which is the higher education debt, and how and when that can be repaid. But people need money to study. That is fine. And of course, people need houses and they need to live in properties. So they cannot acquire that kind of wealth to buy a house outright. So, getting a loan for that is okay. But, for luxuries and consumables and things like that, that should be regulated. My next report will take a look at how people are feeling about debt in Australia.
Mental health experts are urging people to seek help, as new data shows while nearly half the population is feeling overwhelmed by debt, only a third have reached out. Joined now by Dr. Grant Blashki, who's the clinical director for the mental health charity Beyond Blue. Hi Grant, thanks very much for your time. So are you finding that debt and cost of living pressures are increasingly hitting people's mental health?
Absolutely. This recent study is showing about 45%, half of Australian workers are feeling overwhelmed by debt. So this is a really common problem, and it's backed up by a lot of the research we've been doing with Beyond Blue to show these same findings, that being under financial stress puts a big stress on your psychology as well.
What sort of problems does it cause then, mental health wise?
Yes, it's really complex. I think a lot of people feel very like at fault, like why have I got myself into debt? They feel bad about themselves. People end up having problems like sleep problem, conflict at home. Some people get stuck into alcohol. And as a GP, I see that this is a very real concern for people at the moment and really causes a lot of stresses. There's a real pressure cooker on people's households at the moment.
Yeah, and yet only 3 out of 10 people are reaching out for help. Why is that figure so low?
A lot of people feel very stigmatised, they feel very embarrassed, and one of the big messages from Beyond Blue is reach out early. It's never too early to reach out, and we'd much prefer to help before things spin out of control. So always feel comfortable to contact us at Beyond Blue or start with your local GP and get some help early if you're having mental health concerns.
Do people also perhaps feel that a mental health organisation can't offer help easing those financial pressures that are causing the problem in the first place? So why bother?
Yeah, so look, I think if you could just repeat that one, we had a technological issue there.
Okay, just wondering if some people might feel that what's the point in asking for help from a mental health organisation if you can't help with the financial problems that have caused the issue in the first place?
Ah, right, yes. Look, I think that we don't have a magic wand, obviously, and we can't sugarcoat that a lot of people are actually experiencing very real mental health issues. But there's lots of things you can do to improve your coping, to improve the supports you get. We recommend not only our mental health supports, but non-mental health supports like the National Debt Hotline. Recommend catching up with friends or family that can give you that support to share the load, and also making sure that you're keeping your mental health in the best state so you can make good decisions during these stormy times. And so lots of practical things like getting enough sleep, laying off alcohol, looking after your mental health, even though it's a problem. But unfortunately, we don't have a magic wand, and we don't pretend that we can make financial issues just suddenly go away.
So, Grant, though, what are the red flags that people should be aware of, that if they recognise them in themselves or in perhaps others, that they really should get help?
Yeah, some of the red flags that we see are getting into a lot of conflict, particularly at home. As I said, it's a bit of a pressure cooker. Getting into conflict at work, not sleeping, worrying all night, getting stuck into alcohol, feeling bad about yourself. These are common red flags that we see, and there's lots of help that can really help people cope better during these times.
And do you find that if people feel less stressed, then they make better decisions, financial or otherwise?
I think that's right. I think that it is a hard time, but if you've got a calm mind and you're sensibly working your way through what you've got to do, that you've got much more chance of getting things sorted out than compounding things with getting yourself into a real rut, mentally speaking. So we think that that's a worthwhile part of the mix. At the same time, organisations like Beyond Blue are advocating that the financial sector, financial counsellors are making people aware of mental health supports as well, and also at a government level that we're expanding our mental health workforce so that there is more support for people during this very critical time.
Grant Blashki, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you very much for that report from Beyond Blue there as well. So help is available. So we've today looked at the mental health issues surrounding work-life balance and also for debt. So, and these are some of the current issues right here in Australia. While we pretend to be that lucky country, yes, work-life balance is very, very important. There are some people putting in so much effort into businesses, workers and employers included. There's some very diligent workers out there as well who go beyond the call of the duty. But of course, there's always the other side of the coin as well. Some people who always take advantage of the situation and the systems as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful having your company on the show today. Tomorrow we'll bring a special review. Of course, tomorrow we will have the coverage from the Prime Minister Modi's visit. Of course, social media will be just blasted and full, so brace yourself before that, we'll also bring to you the Premier's address to the Indian community at the function on Sunday, marking the 25th anniversary of the Federation of Indian Communities of Queensland. So that the coverage will be something to look forward for tomorrow. Also the coverage of the Prime Minister Modi's visit and that planned reception with 20,000 plus people tonight. Right now, it's time to take a look at some of the functions and events. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you today. It's been wonderful having your company. And as I mentioned before, tomorrow the two special coverage to look forward to, plus, any other important news that might come by. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is your show. If there's anything that you'd like to discuss or come on the show, you're quite welcome, to come in, air your views, air your voice. Whatever it might be, you might have an opinion on a certain topic, on a certain subject, something that's happening out in the community, or you have a function to talk about, or there are, other things happening in the community that you'd like to come on the show and talk about. All of these are very welcome. We can get you into the studios or we can get you in via a video link as well. So both the options are available, but we'd like to hear from you. Also the format of the show, if there's any feedback, do leave that in the comment section. We really value that so that we can tailor the show to make sure that it meets your needs there as well. Because end of the day, the show is meant for you. So it needs to reflect what you would like to see on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it's time to say goodbye.